Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and welcome to the Cancer Research Institute's webinar series, Cancer Immunotherapy in You. Today's date is Wednesday, June 22nd, 2016, and the title of today's webinar is 3 Things to Watch For in Clinical Trials This Year. This is the third webinar in our 3-part focus on clinical trials, which we are presenting as part of Cancer Immunotherapy Month in June. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors. This webinar series is made possible with generous support from Genentech and LabAnswer and its employees, and our friends at AbbVie, Celldex Therapeutics, Newlink Genetics, and Regeneron. My name is Brian Brewer, and I'm Director of Marketing and Communications at the Cancer Research Institute. CRI is the world's first nonprofit organization dedicated exclusively to harnessing the immune system's power to conquer all types of cancer. We fund scientists all around the world whose work has led to significant breakthroughs in cancer immunotherapy research and treatments. Several immunotherapies have received FDA approval for a number of hard-to-treat cancers, and many more are available to patients through clinical trials. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll discuss some of the basics of clinical trial research, as well as 3 things that you should look for when considering enrolling in a clinical trial. We will then open the discussion to questions submitted by you. You can pose your questions at any time throughout the webinar by typing in the Q&A box on your screen. You can also tweet your questions at us at Cancer Research, but be sure to use the hashtag CRIWebinar. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Cancer Research Institute website and on our YouTube channel. Now it's my pleasure to welcome today's expert speaker. Dr. Jill O'Donnell-Tormey is Chief Executive Officer and Director of Scientific Affairs at the Cancer Research Institute. In these roles, she leads the organization's operations and ensures they fulfill CRI's mandate to fund cutting-edge cancer immunology research. She's also overseen the organization's expansion to include patient and caregiver education on cancer immunotherapy. Prior to joining CRI in 1987, she served as a research associate in the Department of Medicine at Cornell University Medical College and as a postdoctoral fellow in the Laboratory of Cellular Physiology and Immunology at the Rockefeller University. Dr. O'Donnell-Tormey received the Cancer Research Institute's 2013 Frederick W. Alt Award for New Discoveries in Immunology, which CRI awards to formerly funded postdoctoral fellows who make significant contributions to immunology research. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry, summa cum laude, from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Cell Biology from the State University of New York's Downstate Medical Center. Thank you so much, Jill, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thanks for that introduction, and welcome to everybody. I'll start by just giving you a brief overview of today's talk. So we'll go through a few points. First, what are clinical trials? What roles they do play in bringing treatments to patients? What are the different types of clinical trials? How can you locate one? And what should you be looking for when you consider a potential cancer immunotherapy clinical trial? The talks today will focus only on immunotherapy trials, but obviously some of the information about clinical trials apply outside of immunotherapy also. So before I jump into clinical trials, it's probably good to just give a little, put us all on the same playing ground and understand and give a little review of what is cancer immunotherapy. So cancer immunotherapy are treatments that actually use your own immune system to basically recognize cancer in your body, go after it, destroy it, potentially leading to control and ultimately cure of cancer. This is a new way that is basically we have been supporting since 1953 at the Cancer Research Institute, but in the last 5 years or so, there's been such dramatic results in the clinic that are really helping to save patients' lives, that the cancer immunotherapy has really become what I call the darling of oncology right now, and it's probably the area where there is the majority of research going on and a great number of clinical trials. So immunotherapy, cancer immunotherapy, is kind of a catch-all term. There are very many different types of immunotherapy. Some of these are listed on the slide in front of you, and I'm not going to take the time to really go into specific details at each. If you'd like to learn more about these, you can certainly go to the Cancer Research Institute's website at cancerresearch.org. We have explanations of all these, as well as I think we already have 2-minute video animations that really describe in a little bit more detail what all these different types of immunotherapies are. Now, though all of these are in areas of very active research, both in the laboratory and in the clinic, The excitement that has been developed in the last 5 or so years has mostly centered around two of these types of immunotherapies, them being checkpoint inhibitors and adoptive cell therapy, and most specifically CAR T-cell treatments. The reason that these are been so exciting is for several reasons. First of all, we're finding that these types of immunotherapies are showing great results in some types of cancers that were previously untreatable by the existing standard of care that were available. And on top of that, the results we're seeing seem to be extremely durable. The results with checkpoint inhibitors, which basically are they are antibodies that take the brakes off your immune system and allow your immune system to do what it has been developed evolutionary to do, is to recognize foreign things in your body. And by just releasing the brakes, we see that they're there naturally, either to stop you from getting autoimmunity, or because cancers have co-opted this as a protective mechanism against an immune response. We're able to see these very, very dramatic responses, and some of them lasting over a decade. I think these are the main points of why they're so excited, and I think we have now the proof of principle that the immune system can be used as a very effective treatment for a variety of cancers. But we are only at the beginning, and we have to continue to doing a lot more research to understand how we can do this in more cancers and in more patients with a given type of cancer. So this just is, I'm not going to go into great detail here, but this is just a list of the recent immunotherapies that have been given approval by the FDA. And this is over the last 6 years. And you can see that there's a variety of different types of treatments that have received approval for a number of different types of cancer. And I think we're only at the beginning. I basically, this is a slide that when I give talks, probably have to update almost every week, 2 weeks or a month, because there's another FDA approval. And I think you're going to continue to see and hear about more immunotherapies receiving FDA approval for more types of cancer. So with that background, I think we'll kind of jump into now more specifically about clinical trials. So what is a clinical trial? So these are really carefully controlled studies that really try to determine the safety and effectiveness of new treatments or medical devices. Today, we're only going to be focusing on clinical trials that are really focusing on treating cancer. And you should understand that when something finally gets into the clinic and for the first time treating patients, it's based on an awful lot of scientific research. So there's research that comes out of the laboratory that justifies a new treatment being effective, potentially effective in patients. But ultimately, to get any new drug approved or any new treatment approved, we do have to go through very controlled studies to understand, does this actually work in patients? And so these are experiments, but they're based on specific criteria that certain patients have to meet, and how these will affect and work in different types. And I think we'll go on probably to the specific types in the next few slides. But these are trials that you can find at major academic centers, but also at your local community. There are a lot of clinics and hospitals that are open and accruing patients to these clinical trials. It requires teams of doctors. There's doctors and nurses and researchers that are all following you. And you're probably enrolling in a clinical trial. You're probably getting more detailed care than you would be if you were outside. You're followed more closely, and you're really being monitored very closely in terms of what is happening to you and your cancer. So here are the basic types of clinical trials that are going on. There's different phases. It goes from phase 1 to phase 4, but in most cases, the treatment's really only to phase 3. So phase 1 are usually small trials. They only require probably 15 to 30 patients in them. And what we're really looking for here is to see if these treatments are safe in patients and at what dosage we can actually give patients in a safe way. So this is, again, data has come out of the laboratory to suggest that this new treatment would be effective in cancer. And this is the first step in a 3-step process to get FDA approval. Once we find after phase 1 that, in fact, you can give this drug safely, it goes on to what would be called a phase 2 study. This is a larger study, many times up to about 100 patients. And here we're taking the dose that was found safe in the phase 1, and now many times looking at in a variety of cancers to see which cancer type these new treatments are actually effective. Once we hone in onto that question, it goes on to a phase 3 study, which is a much larger study, many times up to 1,000 patients or so. And this is many times, these are called randomized studies, so that the new treatment is compared in a very scientifically controlled way with whatever the standard of care is for that particular cancer type. And here we actually then compare and see, is this new treatment in fact better than the existing standard of care? If it is, all this information from these from the phase 1, 2, and 3 studies are presented to the FDA, and they review it and decide whether, yes, this can be approved as a new treatment for this given specific type of cancer. Phase 4 is really after drugs have already been approved, and they're really just followed out. They're already marketed and used widely, but they just follow it further on to see, in fact, how what it's been approved for by the FDA actually is proving out in a much larger population when it goes on to a marketable drug. So here, focusing only in on immunotherapy trials, right now there are over 1,300 cancer immunotherapy clinical trials that are opened and accruing patients. This is probably the most dominant area of ongoing cancer clinical trials, and it certainly reflects the excitement in the field and the potential that immunotherapies have to really treat all cancers. You'll note that there are many more phase 1 and phase 2 trials open than phase 3. This tells you how active it is, that there's many new potential treatments and different types of immunotherapies being tested in many more different types of cancer. And also, there also tells you that when you get to phase 3, which is a much larger trial, and it only gets to phase 3 if things have been proved relatively effective safe and effective in phase 1 and 2, there's always some drop-offs. Not every treatment that goes into clinical trial actually works and is justified to take to a phase 3. But I think this certainly exemplifies that there's an awful lot of trials out there that are available for you in whatever type of cancer you have at this point. This is somewhat of a sad fact. Only 3 to 6% of cancer patients enroll in a clinical trial. And we need clinical trials. Clinical trials are the only way that new treatments can get to you, the patient. Requires, no matter how much laboratory results go on and things look effective, it's only when these things are proven to work in patients that they really can become approved drugs and widely available that any physician can prescribe to cancer patients. So it's important, I think, to this type of webinar to inform you, the patient, what is going on with clinical trials and why they should be at least looked at as a potential option for you as you're on your cancer journey. And the Cancer Research Institute is helping in this way by having on its website Cancer Immunotherapy Trial Finder. It's the only clinical trial finder available that's totally focused just on immunotherapy trials. You can find this at cancerresearch.org/clinical-trials. And this is a way that you can put in your information for your specific type of cancer, the stage you're at, what treatments you have received already, and you can actually speak to a patient navigator that will actually walk you through this, do searches for you, and come back and find potential trials that are available to you. Now, once you get these trials, and there may be more than one, you really should bring these back to your own physician who understands your case better than anyone else and have a conversation and see, are these potential options for you? And this service is free. So now, 3 things to watch for. Access to phase 3 trials. Now, phase 3 trials, as I said earlier, are larger trials, many times up to 1,000 or so patients. And this is where they're really, to get this many patients, these trials really come down that they're opened up by many community oncologists actually are participating in phase 3 clinical trials. So many times these will be trials that you can find more locally in your area. The phase 1 and phase 2 trials may not be exactly close to you, and you may have to go to a larger academic center, which are located in most of the major cities around the United States. But I think phase 3 trials are the final stage. There's more data to suggest that a new treatment that has gotten to phase 3 trial has already been shown to be safe in patients and relatively effective. And this is just a larger study to find out truly, is it more effective than the current standard of care? As I said before, these are randomized. So you go in and you don't, I think a lot of people think you may only get a placebo when you go into a clinical trial, and this may be something that patients don't want. They do want to get treated, and I understand you do want to get treated. But in a phase 3 trial, you're getting either the standard of care or the current new treatment. So you're also to consider early phases of clinical trials. This is where the more novel treatments, the newer things that are just coming out of the lab, and these are things that I think we're finding out, especially with immunotherapy trials, that the effectiveness that they're getting, that they're seeing such large responses, the number of patients that are actually responding to these treatments, that these may change the entire paradigm of how clinical trials are done, because we've actually seen an immunotherapy actually get approved from a phase 1 trial. The results were so impressive in the initial phase 1, they kept on just putting amendments on and adding more patients. So I think it ended up being a few, probably between 500 and 1,000 patients that were on a phase 1 trial, but the data was so impressive, the results so remarkable, the percentage of patients that were responding and the depth of their response so impressive that the FDA approved it on that. So I think more and more you're going to be seeing cutting-edge treatments being available at phase 1. And in these phase 1 studies, you actually get the treatment. And so I think this is something that should be considered. As I said, these may not always be available to you by your local oncologist, but certainly in an academic research center close to you, you could find that. The other thing that's looking out for in cancer immunotherapy trials is what we call combination trials. Many of these FDA approvals that I've recently talked about were for what we would call monotherapy. So these are individual treatments of immunotherapy. But we're finding that obviously not 100% of patients with a given cancer type are responding to this single treatment. So there's data to suggest that if we combine different types of immunotherapy together that work on different mechanisms, that these combinations can be synergistic and we can raise the number of patients that actually respond. So more and more you're going to be seeing combinations of immunotherapies. And these are immunotherapies that are immunotherapy plus a different type of immunotherapy, or it can be immunotherapies with a standard of care, immunotherapy with a chemotherapy, immunotherapy with radiation therapy. And these are all the current cutting-edge experiments that are going on that the entire medical field believes that with these combinations, we can raise what we call the tail of the curve, showing more and more patients that can respond to an immunotherapy-based treatment for cancer and get it up to closer to 80, 90, and hopefully eventually 100% of patients that can respond.
I'd like to just add one of the more prominent examples of this is the treatment that former President Jimmy Carter received. He received an immunotherapy in combination with radiotherapy.
He did.
So, and of course, that was very effective for him.
So certainly true. And it's certainly an area that the Cancer Research Institute is focused on. Our clinical accelerator is our clinical trial strategy, and it is really focused on doing cutting-edge combination immunotherapies. On the slide in front of you, you can see 3 ongoing clinical accelerated trials being funded by the Cancer Research Institute, one in glioblastoma, one in ovarian cancer, and one in advanced solid cancers. And you can certainly find more information on our website, or you can go to clinicaltrials.gov, and that's the NCT number there, and you can find the specifics about those trials.
All right. Well, with that, Jill, thank you so much for that. We'd now like to take some questions from those of you who are watching today's webinar. As a reminder, you can type your questions into the Q&A box on your screen. We do have a couple questions here. Jill, are clinical trials right for everyone?
Well, I'd say I think clinical trials are potential treatments for everyone, but at any given time, it may not be right for you, the patient. There may not be a trial that's specific to your situation in terms of what you've been treated with before or what the stage of your cancer is. But I think it's certainly an option for all patients. But then it comes down to, it is a patient's decision if they want to be in a clinical trial or not. I think it is a way to get the most cutting edge therapies, and especially if the current treatments that are available are not that promising, or if you have failed a current treatment, this is certainly an option for you. And I think it's also that patients feel that if it even doesn't help them, many patients join clinical trials because they know it will, basically, it adds to the entire research dynamic and are actually helping other patients and future patients to develop more effective treatments.
Thank you. We have a question from someone who's done a search for clinical trials, got a bunch of results back, and the question is, how does this patient determine which one is the best?
That's a very good question, and it's a very it's a difficult question for patients. I think it's wonderful that there are a variety of clinical trials that may be available for any given patient, but then you're faced with, what do I do? The best thing I'd say is that you need to go back and share this with your current oncologist. Your oncologist and your treating physician knows your situation, knows your medical history better than anybody else, and you need to have a dialogue and see what there is. And I think they may be able to give an indication in terms of what may be out there in the scientific literature about the various treatments that are being offered. And I think it's really a decision that has to be informed, an informed decision that you need to work closely with your oncologist.
There's a misconception that clinical trials are really a last resort for patients. But that's changing today. At what point should a patient look into clinical trials?
Yeah, I think that is true. I think that has been the feeling, that you only go into a clinical trial if you failed everything else and nothing else works, and this is your only option. Especially with immunotherapies, we're seeing that immunotherapies are moving into frontline treatment. So that for some cases, like in non-small cell lung cancer, there's ongoing trials now that are looking for immunotherapies to be used first as a first treatment for patients. So I think more and more, and I think this is changing because immunotherapies have given such dramatic responses. So these aren't just indications of, overall survival, being expanded by a few months or so. But when you're seeing responses that last years and perhaps decades, it becomes possible that you need to look at these earlier on. And I think we'll probably have a better chance of working in a larger percentage of patients in those cases. So I think it's something that you should really, whenever you have a diagnosis of cancer, it's certainly something you need to bring up with your physician and say, well, what is the treatment possibilities? And they may give you standard of care options. And I think you should ask, well, are there clinical trials that I should be looking at? And I think, that's something to explore for sure.
What if someone's doctor isn't supportive of the idea of clinical trials? What should a patient do in that circumstance?
I think it's very difficult if that happens. I would certainly say you should get a second opinion. I think that most physicians should be welcome. I think they want to give their patients the best options of a great response and great possibilities. So I think in most cases you're going to find physicians, very willing to help you explore this. But if they don't, I'd say you go to another physician.
Could being in one clinical trial possibly take other options off the table later for patients?
I think that's certainly a possibility, but it's not only clinical trials. It's getting any types of treatments. As I said before, these are controlled studies in patients. So they're asking a scientific question. And so you have to make sure your patient population is similar, has have the same criteria. So there, in many cases, you may not be able, there's no one size fits all, one answer to this, but for any given trial, they have criteria that you need to meet. And it may be that if you've been treated with another immunotherapy within the last 6 months, you may not be eligible for this trial. Or if you've gotten another type of treatment that may interfere with this. So it really comes down to looking at trials on an individual basis, looking at what the criteria are, and seeing if you fit that.
And if someone gets into or tries to get into a trial, but they're rejected, does this mean that they won't qualify for other trials?
Definitely not. As I said, each trial has different criteria. There's no single thing that says this is what is required to get into any clinical trial. So every trial is different. All of the eligibility requirements are different. So though you may be excluded from one trial, that certainly does not exclude you from other potential trials.
That's great. We received a number of questions about immunotherapies for specific types of cancer, like breast cancer and pancreatic cancer, and several others. And you did already say that immunotherapy trials right now are testing these in a variety of cancers, and just thought it might be a good idea to just reiterate that in previously untreatable or hard to treat or even rare cancers, immunotherapies are becoming increasingly available.
It certainly is. And I mean, again, I think we've seen a lot of very positive response already in things like melanoma and non-small cell lung cancer. We're seeing great responses in head and neck cancer, even in colon cancer, which previously was not considered to be potentially amenable to immunotherapies. I think in breast cancer, certainly like triple negative breast cancer, which is a difficult type of breast cancer to treat, we're seeing immunotherapy trials going on in these. So I think it's a matter of no matter what type of cancer you have, it is worth exploring what is available in clinical trials and immunotherapies. Because with 1,300 trials out there, I'm sure there in most cases, I think you could probably find a trial that might be suitable for you.
You mentioned that some immunotherapies have proven extremely beneficial in significant percentages of patients who are receiving them. But of course, there's those patients who don't respond. How close are we getting to figuring out why patients don't respond, and how can we turn that into a new way to treat those patients?
Well, this is where I can get on my soapbox and really start talking about research. Or I think, as I said, the proof of principle is there. In the patients that do respond to immunotherapies, we can see that your immune system has the potential to control cancer. Unfortunately, every patient is different. And in those that it doesn't work, we obviously haven't found the right key. And I think this comes down to understanding the various mechanisms of how the immune system works, what may be different biologically in different cancer types that may inhibit a response in a different way. And it is only from research that we're able to do this. And I think it is research, even all the way back, though clinical research is, as I said, essential to getting new treatments to patients. It all starts with discoveries in the lab. So there has to be, a continuing support for research across the board, from the laboratory through translational research through the clinic. And it's by understanding this and understanding better the biology and the interactions that I think we're going to get to a point that you may see down the road that there will be almost personalized treatments for cancer patients. And we'll be able to understand for a given patient, what do they need to allow their immune system to effectively control cancer?
When you say personalized, does this mean it's not a drug that's taken off the shelf, it's custom made, or
I think, I think personalized probably means different things in different situations. When I'm referring to it here, I mean that there may be a different combination therapy that will work with you. Then that even if I have breast cancer and somebody else has breast cancer, the treatment that works for me may not be exactly what works for another patient. So personalizing the treatment, still using the immune system and its innate ability, but understanding what is different from patient to patient and what do we have to do to make sure we can ensure an active immune response that gets around inhibition that the tumor cell may have, that gets around other, physical barriers like stroma, and making sure the immune cells can get into the tumor bed and do what they're supposed to do. And I think it is only with research that we'll understand this and be able to almost, come up with this personalized mixture of immunotherapies or immunotherapy and chemotherapy or radiation that works in a given patient.
You mentioned that immunotherapy has been shown to work in a subset of colorectal cancer patients. And I think that's really good news, not just for colorectal cancer patients, but other patients who and tumor types that are not responsive to immunotherapy based on what we know today. I think that's good evidence that with continued research, we are continuing to learn more, and with that knowledge, find new ways to treat other cancers.
That's definitely true. I think with the subset of colorectal cancers that responded very dramatically to these checkpoint blockades, it was found that they had a high level of mutations. And this mutational load seems to be at least a signal right now that cancers that have more mutations will respond more readily to immunotherapy. So I think we need to understand that, and I think we're starting to do a lot more analysis on tumors themselves and understanding what is the genetic makeup of those, and seeing if we can use that as a tool to direct us to what types of treatments need to be given. And so I think that's exciting. And even even recently, the larger subset of colorectal cancers that do not have this higher level of mutations, were actually saw some indications that a new trial has come out that a combination of an immunotherapy with a targeted therapy actually may show some responses. So all good news, and all due to clinical trials.
Last question of the day. Are cancer vaccines dead? What's the future of cancer vaccines?
I think cancer vaccines are certainly not dead. I think we have spent a lot of time over the last decade or two trying to understand how to create this is a treatment vaccine, not a preventative vaccine for cancer. But we have learned that vaccines actually are activating your immune system, but we've learned that there's an awful lot of immunosuppression at the cancer site. So I think vaccines in combination with checkpoint blockades or other immunotherapies have future potential down the road.
That's good to hear. Jill, thanks so much again for joining us today. And of course, thank all of you for watching today's webinar. I have a few things that I'd like to share with you, but before I do, I just once more would like to thank our generous sponsors, Genentech and LabAnswer and its employees, as well as Regeneron. If you're interested in learning more about cancer immunotherapy, clinical trials, go to our website designed for patients and caregivers at theanswertocancer.org. We also encourage you to join our cancer immunotherapy support community hosted by inspire.com to connect with others who are interested in discussing this new way to treat cancer. I mentioned earlier that June is Cancer Immunotherapy Month, and as part of this awareness-raising campaign, we invite you to help us white out cancer by sharing a photo at whiteoutcancer.com and dedicating it to yourself or someone you know who has been touched by cancer. Finally, in July, we return to our regular webinar series with a presentation by Dr. Robert Vonderheide on immunotherapy for pancreatic cancer. We invite you to register for this upcoming webinar. You can do that at cancerresearch.org/webinars. Also on that page, you can view our entire library of past webinars. If there was something of interest that sparked your interest in today's conversation, in particular those individual types of immunotherapies that Jill described earlier, we have plenty of webinars describing how those work. Once again, this webinar will be available for viewing on the Cancer Research Institute website and on our YouTube channel. Thank you all, and goodbye for now. Thanks, Jill.